Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I'm the pastor here at Edges. I'm grateful to be with you this week. I'm always grateful to be with you, but especially on the week of Thanksgiving. Full disclosure, this is the first time I've been fully dressed in 6 days. So I think I did pretty good, right? And it's a big effort to get all the way dressed. I'm telling you this because I've been sick with an upper respiratory infection for about a month, and I'm fine, and I just put hand sanitizer on my hands, and so we're going to be good. But I want you to know that I may need a little time to breathe during the message, and I need to not get very excited, so pray for that. And here we go. It's the final week of my favorite biblical series. The series has been called Downside Up. It's where we're talking about Jesus' words to some friends. They call them the Beatitudes. That's a big church word that means the blessing. I think if you boil the whole thing down, it's sort of like this is the list of Jesus' favorites. Now, it's not like you're not one of Jesus' favorites if you're not on this list. It's more like Jesus is using this list to remind people that there are some people who we probably wouldn't say have hit the jackpot, but who Jesus says, yep, I pick you. Yep, I pick you. And there's this long list of them in Matthew chapter 5, and you can look at all of his picks. I think we're going to put a partial list at least up on the screen. So you see it, you are blessed, you are blessed, you are blessed. Blessed are folks who are at the end of what they can do. Blessed are folks who are struck by grief. Folks who are in the shadows. People who just want a fair shake for all. Those who are compassionate. The uncluttered people. Now, most days, these probably aren't the identities that most of us are clamoring for. But Jesus says this is where it all becomes clear. Inside these orbits, the goodness of God rushes in. The church word for that is blessed. Blessed is where the full weight of the goodness of God rushes in. Today we have one final favorite of Jesus. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Jesus' final favorite is people who make peace. And then there's one related, sobering category. Listen to this. Who wants this category to be your life? Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Raise your hand if you want that one. Persecuted. So you may get pummeled for being a draft pick of Jesus. With this final addendum, Jesus is making really clear for everybody who's listening what are the downsides of the upside. What are the downsides of the blessing? The downside is they can put you on the outside. You might get blistered for being a peacemaker. You also could get blistered for anything else on the list, for being compassionate, uncluttered, for being somebody who just wants justice for all. When you're compassionate or uncluttered or in the shadows, one result of being on the right side of things might be persecution, Jesus says, but I will even turn that into blessing. Wow. What if that's true? Well, today, Jesus says there's a blessing that the goodness of God rushes in for peacemakers. Now, if I were Jesus, I would absolutely choose to bless people who make peace. Because, well, think about it. That is such an impossible task. Let your mind wander around for a minute about where you've seen peace being made. You see, if you need a peacemaker, it means whatever you've got is not peace. right? That's why you'd need one. And from that not peace place, whatever it looks like, whether it's stirred up or white hot, from the place where tensions run high, from that relationship gone wrong spot, apparently, some people are able to squeeze out peace from the not peace place. And Jesus wants us to remember how important those people are. I'd like to ask you to think for a minute about the last time you witnessed what you call a peace talk. Was it? What do we think about when we think about peace? I mean, I just wish I could point to some real peacemakers. Can you? Think to yourself for a moment. Don't call anyone's name out. Do you know anyone who knows how to make peace? Now, who in the room had someone immediately come to mind? Would you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. You've just proved my point. People who make peace are hard to find. When people in families or in communities or in countries, for example, when people say they want peace, what do you think they're after? Just think about the question for a moment. Don't answer yet. When people say they want peace in a family, in a community, in a country, what do you think they're after? Okay, now you can answer. What do you think? Call out a few snippet answers. To win. They're after love. Tranquility. Relief. Sorry? Acceptance. When people... Did you say quiet? Quiet. Yeah. Compromise. Or after goodness. When you need peace in a situation, what are you after? Safety.
To a certain extent, personal gain.
Personal gain. Okay. A clear conscience. Now, y'all, my head is full of snot.
Sorry.
You need to speak up. Clear conscience. Quiet voices. I've been after that in my whole house, my whole life. Anything else?
I think that each of these would be in an individual's own perspective of what each one of those things.
It would be an individual's own perspective, so our perspectives might be different about how those things come about. Sure. When people want peace, what is it that they're after? If they're after an end to the fighting, if they're after compromise, if they're after personal gain, or they just want to clear their conscience. What do we think peace means? What are we after when we're looking for peace? If we just want relief? Do we want tranquility or calm or quiet voices? Are we looking for safety? Now, another question for you to think about inside your own mind. How do people accomplish those things? How do you think people accomplish the end of fighting, safety, tranquility, calm, acceptance? How do they win, get personal gain, which they call peace? Some people do it through oppression. Okay? let me tag on to that. I would like to offer a couple of tempting options, ways that sometimes people go about seeking what we think of when we think of peace. They're not all the options, just some for beginning thoughts today. The first one is the bulldog approach. This is the approach of oppression. Thank you, Courtney. It's where we take power or control over someone or some situation, and it ends by someone winning. It's the bulldog approach. I call that the equivalent of kind of the shots being fired approach. In order to achieve some peace, there have to be some shots fired, some power over to move to a new place. The second option I've called the doormat approach. That's where we abdicate power or control. It's where we end something but by losing, by giving up everything. It's the drop your weapons approach to peace. This is the role I most often play in my family. And we call it the peacemaker. Just help it end. The third tempting option I've called the diplomat. Some people call this the solver. It's where power and control are allocated among the parties, and the end happens with a compromise, something in the middle. People say they can live with it. I think of this as like the ceasefire approach. Before we go too far down these as the peace roads, this is a spot I think we better be careful. We better ask a good question. These approaches may get results, but are the results peace? Though these are some of our tried and true strategies, I think none of them, at least not by themselves, are what Jesus was thinking about when Jesus thought about peace. Because, look, all of these behaviors tend to sacrifice relationship. All of them. And when Jesus thinks about peace, Jesus thinks about the presence of right relationship. So the biblical concept for peace most often is used through the word we call shalom. And that idea is the idea that peace is not the absence of conflict. It's not simply solving a problem. It's not the stopping of a war or a fight. It is the presence of a right relationship when it should have been otherwise. When it could justifiably be otherwise. Now, I think we know this. I think we've settled for something that actually, when pressed, we know isn't really peace. I believe we know this because we have seen it sometimes in our families, sometimes in our communities, and sometimes even in our world. But I wonder if we've just gotten so used to settling for the half-ass alternatives that we've given up on Jesus' better idea that the goodness of God rushes in for people when they give everything they've got for right relationship. To test that hypothesis and see if it's true, I'd like to ask you if you have ever witnessed a conflict when you realized that on the other end of it was a true peacemaker. Anywhere. If you've ever seen this, or if you've ever been the project of a peacemaker, as I have been, you know that there is this sky that opens up. It's like this whole other layer of oxygenated atmosphere. It's where things get made right, really right, when they should have been otherwise. When this happens, it feels like some widely distributed jackpot, some huge surprise blessing. This is what Jesus is talking about. And usually, everybody who's in the orbit of a peacemaker can sense it. It's like a windfall of what's right in the world. And the best way I know to describe it is like when you read in the news a story of a real peacemaker, or when you watch peace being made around the dinner table at Thanksgiving. You get this palpable kind of stop in your tracks Something different just happened here. Something bigger than the moment might have held. Something that shifted both reality and possibility just happened. Have you ever had that sensation? Here's the best story I've got. About a month ago, I'm betting almost all of us watched the news, where we saw 11 children of God who were killed inside their house of worship in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Those murders were just more. They were just increasing numbers in what is perhaps our fastest growing category of not peace. We've come to call it, without even flinching, the category of hate crimes. The household word. The immediate aftermath and chaos was complicated by a president who many, maybe even all believe has championed not peace with his general rhetoric. And who some felt was directly responsible for the act. Those who felt this way called the shooting a direct culmination of the president's influence. And yet, President Trump, like many other presidents in situations that have been similar, expressed the possibility that he would visit the Tree of Life synagogue where the shootings took place in the coming days. With peace on their minds. A group of 11 courageous Jewish leaders in Pittsburgh wrote a letter to President Trump. Did any of you see it? The letter read, in part, President Trump, you are not welcome in Pittsburgh until you commit yourself to compassionate, democratic policies that recognize the dignity of all of us. Peace? But Jeffrey Myers, who was the rabbi who was leading the Shabbat services on the day of the shooting, had a different take. Myers said that no one person or group could be blamed because hate, he said, doesn't know religion, race, creed, or political party. Nobody gets to claim a corner on hate. And then he said, the President of the United States is always welcome. I am a citizen. He is my president. And then he referenced a biblical story of another world tragedy written about in the Bible, after which God said, I have learned that man from his youth is prone to evil. You would think that would be a horrific thing for God to tell us, said Myers. But the message I get from that is that, yes, there is the possibility of hate in all people, but there's also the possibility of good. Bulldog? Doormat? Diplomat? Something else altogether. That's a story. What's a place in your personal orbit? Each one of you. What's a place in the things that you care about or touch in an active way that could use a peacemaker? I'd like to ask you to think of a real place, and then I'd like for you to let that be a hypothetical case study as we think together for the next few moments. And if you can't think of one, then just use the story I just shared to try out some of these ideas. Jesus believes right relationships are possible. And most days, I think that everybody but Jesus has pretty much given up on that audacious dream. But what if real peace? What if a windfall of healthy connection is still on the table for humans? What if healthy, real peace is truly up for grabs? What if we can be the engineers of peace in our families, in our community connections, and even in world relationships? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verses 9 and 10, "Blessed are the peacemakers, because there were some." They're the children of God. And Jesus warns that getting to peace may have big downsides before it turns up. Just think of how you felt about what Rabbi Myers did. You didn't want to be that kind of peacemaker, did you? It may have some big downsides. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So how does Jesus think it's possible to make peace? One really cool thing about the Beatitudes is like they're this little introduction of this long, rich discourse that you could just rumble around in for days. It's like Jesus starts by saying, okay, here are some of my favorites, guys. I want you to know who they are. And then after he says that, we have the Beatitudes that we've been trying to understand for 4 weeks. And then the story goes on for several more verses about how people can live inside those blessings. There are examples in the text of the scripture. And then if you follow the thread for a few more lines, you get down around verse 38, and Jesus circles back around to the not very easy answer and question of how it's possible to make peace. He offers 3 pictures of what true peacemakers are like, how they make peace. I'd like for us to see if we could imagine it. All right, get ready. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." Well, this is not helpful. I mean, it's hard to see these verses as anything but a vote for doormat, right? It seems like Jesus is voting that to make peace is to masochistically let people step all over us. 3 times, no less. Unless there's a place for contextual imagination here. And this is so important. This is why it's so important not just to pick up your Bible and read it on the face of things. You got to get together with other people, understand the context, be in a good church, or we're going to screw this up. And if we screw this up by taking that for face value, guess what? People blame it on God. It's not God's fault God has such a bad reputation. So that's a total aside. But this is why it's very important to read the Bible well together. So here's a place for some good contextual imagination. What if, in each of these cases, Jesus is pointing us toward the one surprising thing 3 different times that will always rattle evil? See if we can parse out what it might be. So in the case of turn the other cheek, when someone wrongs you and the conflict is white hot, this is an argument for don't shrink back or run away. Don't be a doormat. And it's an argument for don't strike. Don't be a bulldog. Instead, you turn and look them in the eye. You be relentless relationally, without giving up your own dignity and without taking it from somebody else. Inside your own personal case study, what could this actually look like? For Rabbi Myers, maybe it looked like, yes, you're welcome. I won't ostracize you because you ostracize others. Why is Jesus suggesting this? One piece of it has to be that when we look into each other's eyes, it is much harder to hurt each other. Throwing grenades from Pittsburgh, throwing grenades from Washington, D.C., or look each other in the eye. What about the coat? This is yet another strange vignette. But it's a reference, actually, to the justice system in the book of Deuteronomy, where if a poor person was being sued, and I mean a poor person who's lost everything already, they could be taken to court even for their clothes, their outer clothes. And their outer garments were the final form of self-protection in a culture where you needed that kind of self-protection, right? So to strip naked, so to speak, was to be willing to forfeit your own pride to expose the greed of somebody else. Think about that for a moment. So in this scenario, the energy is toward what we might think of as a wake-up call. Do you see what you've done? Is this what we want to be about? Again, I think we saw what that looked like in the Jeffrey Myers story. What about in your own cases? How would you operationalize something different than bulldog or doormat or diplomat, using the creative imagination in these weirdly worded scenarios? All right, the never-ending walk. Again, strange. But for first century folk, a common occurrence was for a civilian to be asked to walk a mile with an occupying soldier, a military soldier. Why? Because they needed help carrying their gear and their supplies. No one person could do that. But just 1 mile. Roman law sought to be fair about that. And they specified that Jewish civilians had to walk 1 mile, but anything further was an infraction of the military code. And it was also absurd to think that any Jew would choose to help an occupying soldier. They're not on the same team. So imagine not fighting that, not fleeing from it, but insisting on another mile. Why would you do that? Because maybe it would help you get to know the other not as an enemy, but as a person. And how could you do that without sacrificing your own dignity or requiring the dignity from someone else? What about in your own peacemaking situations? In each instance, Jesus is teaching true peace. You see, making peace has very little to do with any actual conflict. It has very little to do with solving the problem, and everything with how right relationship is a reorienting factor that turns not peace on its head. You notice in all three scenarios, we don't get to know the outcome. We don't get to know what was the peace that was accomplished. It's probably because it's always some kind of individualized blessing that God gives. I bet if we went to Pittsburgh right now and looked at the results of the aftermath of all that's gone on there, where there have been peacemakers, I bet we could see the miracles in motion. And I bet we could understand the ripple effects. But what we simply do know is that Jesus promises that this, the place of peacemaking, is the place where the goodness of God rushes in. There's a theologian whose name is Walter Wink. That is his real name. And he's a brilliant theologian with kind of a funny name. Anyway, he says this about this situation. He says, what we see here is a Jesus who abhors both passivity and violence. Neither are your real options. Who carves out a third way that is neither submission nor assault. It's neither fight nor flight. It's not doormat. It's not bulldog. It's connection. Jesus has new ideas for how to make peace. The cheek, the coat, and the 2-mile walk are metaphorical, ludicrous examples on purpose. They're metaphors. They're not meant to be taken literally, but they offer the possibility that through connection, evil can be exposed without being mirrored. Think of how often that's the choice we choose. To fight evil with the same kind of mirroring. They show us that oppressors can be resisted without being emulated. We don't have to become filled with hate to eradicate it. That enemies can be neutralized without being destroyed. Think of the biggest enemy you know. What if that enemy could be neutralized without being destroyed? It's hard to want to be a peacemaker, isn't it? Because we want to destroy. I can think of enemy number one right now. Doesn't that sound like it would be Jesus' idea? The preservation and the dignity of all people. That is the prophetic imagination that can make peace. So, in your own scenarios that you were thinking about, if you can bulldoze your way into getting what you want, but you cannot maintain a right relationship while doing it, it isn't peace. There is more blessing available if you will reclaim Jesus' idea. And if you can doormat your way, if you can give up everything just to stop the chaos, but you have to bury yourself, it isn't peace. It's something else, but it's not peace. Jesus says, there is another idea available to you. Claim it. Practice it and see the blessing that will come. In order to do that, we would have to end these disembodied, disconnected practices that we have come to trust. Bulldog, doormat, even diplomat. Would it wake us up to the prophetic imagination of Christ? Because Jesus' mission is to eradicate evil. Jesus' idea is to vaporize every wrong relationship and to fill that space with goodness and blessing. So courageous connection in the face of conflict. Courageous connection in the face of conflict. Connection without passivity and without violence. Jesus says that's what creates peace. That's why if I were Jesus, I would absolutely choose to bless people who make peace. I would put confetti all over their living because, well, it's just such an impossible, upside-down miracle of God. And if I were drowning in not peace, if I were drowning in not peace, and if I were tired of scrolling through the options that I know are not actually going to make things right, I think I might give Jesus' ideas a shot. So let it be. Amen.